Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective. Today we're going to be looking at a commercial grade laptop from ASUS called the X551. This is the C variant, but pretty much like a lot of consumer products, this has a variant depending on which region you are in. This one was sold pretty much exclusively by ASUS Canada, and this is what you would call a basic laptop. It sits on your lap. It can connect to the internet, it's got a hard drive, it's got a little bit of RAM, it's got an optical drive, a big screen, and a big keyboard. And that's really all it was trying to be, and I think it actually succeeds. So let's just do a quick tour of the machine. We do have this kind of textured plastic finish, which for the most part seems to wear fairly well considering this machine's age. Along the side here, we do have the following ports. We do have a headphone microphone combo jack, USB 3.0, USB 2. We have HDMI and VGA, and the two, as far as I'm aware, cannot be used together because those plugs are so darn close, they probably wouldn't fit anyway. You've got a network jack, you have your air exhaust port, your barrel plug. Along the back, you have absolutely nothing, including no way to remove the battery. We'll talk about that in a bit. You have your Kensington lock slot and then your optical drive. On the front, we also, in the top left-hand corner, have hidden a standard SD card slot. Beyond that, on the inside, we see a generously sized keyboard as well as trackpad. The trackpad does have actually a nice click to it, almost everywhere, except for the top left and top right corners. Again, not surprising for a laptop of this price point. Two generous places to rest your palms. We do have a number pad on the side because of the size of the screen, and a pretty standard looking keyboard. The keyboard is not backlit in any way, and if you have never seen all of these green keycaps, that's pretty much the Canadian multilingual standard keyboard. The screen is pretty standard. It is your, average 15-inch display, nothing really to write home about. In terms of other specs, we do have an Intel Pentium 2117U CPU, and this one actually has a whopping 8 gigabytes of RAM in it, mostly to help with the CPU. We do have standard Intel graphics with 2 gigabytes of RAM to run that. Standard mechanical hard disk is sitting in there, as well as a standard DVD-ROM. So if you are really looking for the absolute basics when it comes to what makes a laptop, you're pretty much looking at it. There are a couple of special things going on the inside, so when we go to take it apart, we'll point those out as we go. So let's actually go ahead and dive right into this machine, see how we can take it all the way down today, and just some of the unique features inside. Okay, let's go ahead and disassemble this. The very first thing that we will need to do is go into the BIOS and disable the battery, because the battery is not removable. There is no way to access it without disassembling the entire laptop, and oddly enough, there doesn't seem to be a way to remove the optical drive without disassembling the entire laptop. So without further ado, let's go ahead and loosen all of the screws around the edge of the machine. It is worth mentioning that all of these screws are a variety of different lengths. This isn't like other machines where they have universal screw lengths and you can put them in wherever you want. So off camera here, I just have them arranged pretty much in the order that they will need to go back in. Once we have all of the screws loosened, we will need to go ahead and start to pry up the plastic case. And that will be a little bit of a chore. So we're going to go ahead and grab our trusty plastic pry tool. The safest method of entry is probably just going to be in and around the optical drive itself. So I can already see the nightmare this is going to be, because even though everything is screwed up from the bottom, this is actually what you're removing. You're not removing the bottom plate. I can tell because of just how the weight is shifting. I can see that the motherboard is actually secured to the bottom of the clamshell. So that means when I lift this up, there's going to be at least one ribbon cable connecting the keyboard, probably the trackpad, and possibly the power button all to this. If we lift this up ever so slightly, I can count exactly that many ribbon cables. So there are 3. And they're not on the shortest leash I've ever seen. The one for the power button is certainly the shortest. So I'm going to reach in here and flip that cable clip up and remove that. And I'll show you a close-up of that when we're actually in the machine. Lifting up a little bit more, I can go ahead and flip up the clip for the trackpad, and then moving further in, I can go ahead and flip up the cable for the keyboard, and finally we can remove it. So like I said, on the inside we've got the one for the power button, which is its own independent module screwed to the keyboard case. We do have the trackpad cable here, and we've also got the keyboard cable. Looking at this, it would appear that the keyboard is plastic riveted into the top case. You can appear to replace the trackpad independently, which is good. But one of the reasons why it feels the way that it does is that it's part of this chassis. So if you're replacing the keyboard, you are replacing pretty much the top case by the looks of it. That's a bit sad to see, but it's probably built pretty cheap. Now, if we go ahead and look on the inside, the places where we removed cables were here, and they flip up. We had one here, and we had one here. And these are just the connectors that flip up. You can easily do it with a fingernail. You don't need any special tools. On the inside here, we can see our battery pack is along the top. Why it wasn't made a removable part of the chassis, I can only imagine was to reduce cost. According to this, it is a 2200 milliamp 32 watt hour battery. And oddly enough, the battery more or less lifts up and out. There are 2 screw holes that should be connecting it to the chassis, but they don't seem to be necessary. And if you look at this battery, like, it's finished like you would expect it to be on the exterior of a laptop. I can't help but feel, including this connector, like that's a connector that you see on an external battery. That's not one that you see in an internal battery. So this to me is like a recycled part, probably from another laptop design. Anyway, now that we have got that out, we can see that our optical drive is held in with a single screw, as we would expect to see. But of course, rather than have it accessible on the bottom for easy repair and removal, it just slides out like that. And now all of a sudden, we're starting to see how integral the parts that we're removing from this are to the actual structural integrity of the design here. Now, normally I wouldn't disassemble a laptop this far, especially when it's not mine, but we're gonna keep going because this is interesting to me now. It's like, how much can we remove and not have the screen tip over due to the weight difference? So next up, we are gonna remove the hard drive, which has this really strange looking bracket, and it is held in by 4 screws. So we're gonna go ahead and remove those. Now, for the most part, space is used efficiently on the inside. This speaker is a unique setup. It's actually curled around the fan, which is a unique choice. We'll walk our hard disk out. Nothing really to write home about here. It's a standard mechanical hard drive. You could throw in a SATA drive if you really wanted to. We're gonna put that off to the side. And now we got another hole. And I am very curious to know if our RAM is actually upgradable on this. And we're only going to find that out by pretty much taking the entire motherboard out of the chassis. So to do that, we are going to need to disconnect a few more things. We do have a display cable up here in the top left-hand corner. We've also gone and disconnected our wireless card there, and the wires feed up through there. So let's go ahead and remove the screws holding in our motherboard, and we'll see if we have any sort of upgradability on the other side of the board. Okay, so after disconnecting our speaker, our fan, as well as the 2 screws holding in the left side of the hinge, you should be able to wiggle the board out. And yep, that's the tipping point, literally, right there. And we have a single slot of RAM that we can upgrade on the back of the board. We've also got our CMOS battery there, and part of the heat sink that is drawing heat away from the unit and blowing it out at the back of the machine. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. Very simple, very inexpensively made machine, where these guts are pretty much what make up the main chassis and all of the structural integrity that goes with it. And it is worth noting that the exhaust for the fan is here, so it's actually pushing air from, or sucking air in probably from the keyboard area and blowing it past the CPU, and then that hot air is then being channeled through these pieces of plastic and then blown out the laptop. I'm not any kind of thermal engineer, but that doesn't seem like a terribly efficient thing to do. But then again, with no heat pipes in this machine whatsoever, it probably doesn't need it. It's just one of those things. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this back together and draw a couple of conclusions. So one of the interesting things about consumer laptops like this is often all of the branding that they put on the technology. The speaker has a technology, the display has a technology, like everything is kind of given this proprietary name to make it sound like it's more than what it is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be sometimes a little bit of marketing. This claims an instant on from sleep of about 2 seconds, which, you know, for a mechanical hard drive, I've seen things boot a heck of a lot slower than this. It's not lightning fast, but it's definitely not too bad. Now, in terms of seeking one of these out, I don't know if I would necessarily seek one out, because with a lot of consumer laptops, as we saw on the inside, what makes up the structural integrity is actually the components. So if it's had a hard life, chances are pretty good that these machines don't last very long. However, if you need the bare minimum computer, this will provide the bare minimum computer experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you happen to see one lying around for like $100, maybe $150, you might be able to consider it a pretty safe purchase for that family member that you know is going to do nothing outside of surf the internet. The display is actually pretty decent despite the not matching the refresh rate of the camera. It's fairly bright. The fan isn't too loud, even though it's located in the center of the chassis. The keyboard isn't terrible. It is tremendously adequate. And I think that's how I would best describe it. There's nothing wrong with it inherently. There's nothing great about it either. Anyway, I think I've said enough about this machine, so thank you very much for watching. And if you enjoy this sort of content, I'm going to leave the big 4 at the bottom here for you. Please like the video, share it, subscribe if you'd like to support the channel, it means a lot, and hit that notification bell so when videos like this are released, you are the first to see them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.